so much for coming. I just have to put it out there that both Echo and myself are incredibly nervous. But okay, no, not just me. I'm very nervous. Very excited to be doing this. But I'm going to do, the introduction, even though I know most people here are very familiar with who he is. But firstly, thank you to Serge Chucha for the music. And he's playing a violin made by Albertus Becker, who is here, right over there. And as Helene mentioned, that the music and the violins are a big theme in the music, in the book rather, but we'll go into it a little bit later on. So this is the launch of Echo Duka's fourth novel, Yellowbone. And Echo used to be an oil field engineer who became a banker, and now he's a man who works in data science, but he says that he's not good enough to be called a data scientist. So I have to be incredibly careful how I refer to him. Yellowbone is his fourth novel. His first was White Wahala, and that was followed by Dying in New York, and the book that was my introduction to your work, which is The God Who Made Mistakes. And when I was reading up on Echo, just trying to find a great way to introduce him, I decided I'm going to steal something that Joanne Richards, who's also thanked in the acknowledgements of Yellowbone, wrote about him. She says, Echo explores compelling characters with a profound sensitivity and manages to convey a poignant and acutely recognizable sense of human frailty, which cannot help but draw you in. But it's the writing itself that makes Echo a real joy to read. His elegant style creates the perfect tension. Do you rush onward to satisfy your curiosity, or linger over the graceful rhythms and poetic imagery? While Echo is a literary writer, his clarity of expression makes him delightfully accessible, and I really don't think anybody could describe it any better than she already did, which is why I stole it. So Echo, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you very much.
And very excited to be talking about Yellowbone. Can you just, for the people who haven't read it yet, tell us what the book is about and what brought it about?
Okay, thank you. So what the book is about, the book at its core is really about the love between a daughter and her father, and what happens when the love goes through a severe test. And it just so happens that the daughter in the book is light-skinned. So that's where the name Yellowbone comes from. Where the spark or the impetus to write this book actually came to me in 2017. And some of you may remember that there was a light-skinned lady who was killed. Her name was Karabo Mokwena. And I just happened to stumble on a YouTube. It was a YouTube video where the then Minister of Police, Fikile Mbalula, was speaking to policemen in the week that her body had been found. And he said words to the effect, how could they kill such a beautiful woman? How could they kill a Yellowbone? And it got me thinking that, why is the complexion of her skin so important that a Minister of State should actually mention it? So that's what got me thinking about the fear of Yellowbone, and that's what led me to start to write the book.
And talking about the title, you and I had a previous discussion, and you mentioned that the book is about more than colorism.
Yes, it is.
But referring to the title specifically, I mean, it's been a little bit controversial simply because of the connotations of the word Yellowbone or the term Yellowbone. I mean, and I said this to you before, if I was not familiar with your work,
right,
and a massive fan of your work, if I'd seen that on a bookshelf and I'd seen that it says Yellowbone, it would have made me quite apprehensive. But you said that you weren't aware before about, the connotations around that word and how it's kind of controversial. Do you want to go a bit into that?
Yes. Sure, yes. So in writing the book, and I'm sure you can imagine that writing is a very lonely experience. So you sort of lock yourself away for a year or more, and you write and you write and you write. So the only time I started to tell people about the book was when it was done. And I remember when I told Nazizwe, I think she's here somewhere, that the book was called Yellowbone. She was horrified. and it was then I began to realize, or I began to get the inkling that perhaps the name is quite a controversial name, and it's not a title that will leave people unmoved.
and you mentioning now that writing is a very lonely experience. Talking a bit about your writing process, because you've said you're not super precious about it, but you're a man of numbers, you're a man of maths, but you're also a man of creativity. And do you find that there's some sort of parallel in terms of, for instance, how you would approach science and mathematics versus how you would approach your writing? There's a part in the book, I'm just going to read from page 153, it's not a spoiler for those who haven't read it, but just to contextualize it, it's two of the characters in the book, Garabo and Andre, meeting for the first time. And Andre is a violinist, and Garabo's boyfriend Nigel is a student of Andre's. So that's where the names come from. But it says, "Has Nigel taught you anything about violins?" he asked. Garabo rolled her eyes. "Nigel, he gets so serious when he plays, I'm afraid to interrupt him." Andre pondered this for a moment. "Yes, Nigel can be very diligent." "You sound unsure," Garabo said. "Isn't diligence a good thing?" And then Andre responds, "It is, but diligence must not obscure the sheer joy of playing." And when I read that, it made me think of how you say you try to write every single day, and having that discipline as a writer, versus does that for you, like, how does that kill the joy in a way and the pleasure of writing if you approach it seriously?
No, not at all, because when I write, I look forward to writing the next day, and I think if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't stick at it for a year or more. So it's actually quite an intensely pleasurable experience.
No, you don't. But you also find maths and numbers and science pleasurable. So is there a parallel between how you would approach your work in terms of, dealing with data and being a writer? Because when we were speaking about it earlier, he made it sound very magical. I've never heard mathematics sound so romantic, so like you were so in love with it, but you're also just as in love with the writing. Is there a parallel about how you approach the two very different disciplines?
And I think there is, and there are 3 data scientists here in the room, so I need to be careful about exactly what I say. But I remember long ago when I was at the University of Santa Barbara and I was doing a master's, and one of the subjects I was doing was maths, and I don't remember it, but I know it was maths it was actually maths to quite an advanced stage. And I remember solving a problem one evening, and the answer just seemed to drop out, and it was almost a spiritual experience, right? And I read much later that when really good mathematicians find an elegant solution, they say they've seen the face of God, and it sort of felt like that for a brief and very fleeting moment. So that thrill is quite similar to the pleasure that I get from writing when the words all fall into place and the story moves me. Because it needs to move me, I think, before it moves you. So yes, I think that there is a similarity between the two.
Do you have a greater love between the two?
Oh, I think that's hard.
Versus writing, which is?
I think the writing comes, I think it comes easier. And I don't really work in mathematics, though I think I do apply, the mathematical principles and the concepts. So I would say I work more directly in writing now than I do in mathematics.
Okay. Yeah. And then before we move back to Serge to play us some music, I know that this is the 3rd version of the book. So the book that we're getting is your 3rd, draft, I suppose. Why did it take 3 tries to get it right?
Oh, I think it took more than 3 tries. So this is the 3rd. It's the 3rd major draft, but then within this 3rd draft, there must be about at least a dozen reworkings of the story. And I can see some of the writers here nodding their heads. So the first draft just felt wrong. It was clumsy. It was more like vaudeville. So I spoke to the guys at All About Writing, which is a great set of writing courses, and they sort of confirmed my thinking that the first draft was actually crap. So I threw it away and I started again. And then when I sent it off to the publisher, who is in here, she sort of liked it, but there were too many first-person characters, so it started to get confusing. So she asked me quite nicely to rewrite it, but then to rewrite it in the third person. So that's what I did. So then that became the third draft of the book, but then within the third draft there are multiple readings and fixings and changing. So, and I think I lost track of the number of drafts.
And how happy are you with the final one?
I'm actually very happy with it. It's a pretty good book.
Now we're going to have Serge play some music for us. He's playing Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm going to play a portion of the Tchaikovsky, because the Tchaikovsky concerto itself is about 45 minutes long. And we couldn't get an orchestra together for tonight, so I'm just going to play for you basically the introduction and the first theme of the concerto. And I think Eka might tell you later why he's included it, what his connection to the work itself is.
But before we go a little bit into it, spoiler free, I promise, could you please just read a passage for us from early on in the book?
Oh, so the piece I'm going to read is it's a piece where you meet the family. So the young girl, her father, and her mother, and it's when they go to church. As having grown up in Ghana, church is a big thing in my life. So and there's always a church in my life. So it starts like this. Everyone in Mthatha knew Bill Harrison. He was a quiet man with spindly legs and lank blonde hair that had long retreated from a large speckled forehead. He looked more like a tame accountant than a successful farmer. There was a time when it seemed as if every other person in Mthatha worked for the Harrisons. It was rumored that Bill Harrison preferred women as his farm workers, for the men were often turned away. The Harrisons' farm was not far from the Bentl's house. In fact, Karabo's mother worked there too for a while. She helped to look after the house many years ago when Mrs. Harrison had fallen ill. Maybe he hasn't got his papers yet, Precious said. Teacher, who's the father, discounted that suggestion with a harsh grunt. It doesn't take that long to get Australian papers. I could do it in 3 months, and I'm not even white. I hear the black people in Australia have a hard time, her mother said. I've seen pictures of them, and some of them are very dark as... She stopped herself and looked away from teacher. They drove the rest of the way to the church in silence. The Latter-day Church of Holy Fire was an outwardly nondescript building made of galvanized metal roofing sheets. It used to be a warehouse, and in summer, the smell of chemicals seeped from the walls and made the congregation even more lightheaded. Even more lightheaded than Pastor Adebayo's sermons did. It was full today with more than 200 people jammed into the wooden pews. The Bentles were lucky to find a space at the back, where they squeezed in between a woman with 2 babies on her knees and a man who was already asleep. It wasn't only Pastor Adebayo that Karabo looked forward to seeing on Sundays. She hoped Inspector Tulisani from the Mtata police station would be there too. With his slim-cut jackets and mirrored glasses, Inspector Tulisani could have been a model in a men's fashion magazine, or an actor in an American crime drama. Slick American crime dramas didn't translate easily to Mtata, but somehow Inspector Tulisani pulled it off. Inspector Tulisani served as an usher in the church. At collection time, he carried the velvet pouch from pew to pew. He always assigned himself to the side of the aisle where Karabo was sitting. She thought that was rather cute. That morning, when Inspector Tulisani came up and handed Karabo the pouch, his jacket fell open, revealing the polished black butt of a gun. How? Karabo was so alarmed she almost let the pouch fall to the floor. Since when were guns allowed in church? She glanced at her parents to see if they'd seen the gun, but their eyes were closed and their hands were raised to the ceiling in the exact pose Mama disapproved of. Karabo scrabbled in her pocket for the 5 rand coin she'd brought with her. As she dropped it into the pouch, she looked up and Inspector Tulisani's eyes met hers. She saw an almost desperate pleading in them. It was the same look she'd seen on the odd job man's face that morning. She drew a sharp breath, not knowing whether to be furious with Inspector Tulisani or sad. Men had the strangest ways of signaling that they wanted to fuck.
I think one of the most outstanding things about the way that you write is that you really do draw the reader in. You just pull us in, you seduce us, and then you sort of just, you tease us a lot because there's so much restraint in the way that you write that is really beautiful but also very frustrating. I mean, do you edit yourself very heavily?
Oh, I do. So the best part of writing for me is actually when the book is done and I go back and I work through it from the beginning, and I'm not looking for the plot or the story, and I'm assuming that's all been sorted, but I'm looking for the musicality and the words. So that's when I would change words and move things around, just so that it sounds right, and it's almost like I'm listening to music, though there are no notes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's maybe where the restraint comes from, because I try, and I think that all of the writers in the room would seek to do the same thing, and probably do it much better than me. But it's about not telling you everything, but leaving as much as you can to your imagination.
And one of the most outstanding things about Yellowbone, and I think just your work in general, is that you touch on so many different themes, and your work is layered and complex, but not, in my opinion, it's not confusing. So you manage to cover a lot of different themes without overwriting, which I think is incredible. But for instance, talking about, Karabo. And writing from basically a female perspective. I mean, a lot of male writers really cannot write for women. I think any female reader will tell you that. Like, you roll your eyes, you can tell a man wrote this. You know, this is terrible, you can't understand the experience. One of the things that stood out for me that I really loved is how you capture the misogyny and the desire that men have for Karabo, yet the hatred that they also harbor towards her in the book. And I think it's something that a lot of women can relate to, whether you're light-skinned or you're not light-skinned. Like, you know, you grow up in a world where men do want to fuck you, but they also want to kill you, right? And there's a particular scene where, very early in the book, where Karabo's walking down the street and she's sort of trapped by 4 guys who are like the same age as her, they're all teenagers. And there's so much contempt from those guys, like, you know, they are really like, firstly they're trying to win her over, but obviously on their own terms, objectifying her. But then when they see that that's not working, then of course they turn the tact around and become really like vengeful and mean and frightening. And reading that for me, and I think maybe any woman who also reads that, but you know, you get chills reading that because it's something that a lot of women have experienced. And I'm curious to know how you managed to capture that as a man, writing from the perspective of a woman.
I'm glad you think that the book is not confusing. So that says to me you didn't see the first draft. I've always been more comfortable writing about women than men, and I don't know why that is. It might be because I'm the youngest in our family, and I remember that a lot of my youth, yes, when I was like 6 or 7 or 8, I would spend a lot of time in my sister's room. And I realize now that it was to the sort of a window, when I wasn't, and I was young enough to be there and not too old, so I shouldn't be there. But that, and I think maybe that's what shaped or led me to be more comfortable about writing about women and empathizing with women. So I really have no time for the, you know, for the male posturing and the bullying. And I think in my work, when I'm not writing, that's the spirit I bring to the company I work in. So I think it comes from spending a lot of time in my sister's room when
and there are some dark and intense themes that you do cover in the book. We'll talk about that just now. But you also pepper in really like delightful pieces of social commentary, you know, where you just sort of throw something in there a little bit and you move along. But like one of the ones that stuck out to me, which is in chapter 27, is the sentence, going back once again to the meeting between Karabo and Andre for the first time in London. One moment he was playing the most wonderful music, and the next he was spewing profanities like they were back in South Africa and she'd cut him off in traffic.
And I think that's the great thing about being a writer, so you can sort of fix things retroactively. So what I mean by that is that, so the cutting off in traffic, it actually happened to my wife, right? So when she came home and told me about it, you know, there's nothing that I could do, but I can write about it.
And I mean, do you find that with your writing that there are a lot of, or a fair amount of experiences and people and characters who are sort of drawn from your real experience? I mean, I understand and completely acknowledge and respect that writers are writers and that you can completely make things up and you don't have to relate to it. But do you find that you do get little bits in your books where it's like inspired by something, somebody?
Sure, yeah,
you know?
Hugely so. So there'll always be snippets of somebody, and it may not be the whole person. It may just be a mannerism or a way of speech, or they may have a defect that I've seen in somebody and it's stuck in my mind and I want to express it. So yeah, there's actually a lot of that, and there's also a fair amount of me in the story as well. So I think that in this story, so Karabo's father, teacher, and I think there's a fair amount of me in him as well.
Yeah, I would believe that. I mean, I don't know you. I've met you a couple of times, but when I first meet teacher in the book, also I'm like, it sounds kind of familiar in a way. But we're just gonna go to some more music and then get back into the conversation. So Serge is gonna play us "Spring" by Vivaldi.
Right, there might be a few clicks in the beginning because there's no conductor. It has to give me some idea of where to go. So please excuse the clicks, but we'll try.
have a few more questions, and then we're going to go to music again, and then the question and answer session. So back to some of the themes in the book, which I wanted to cover earlier. I mean, without giving a lot away, but you know, there's abuse, there's sexual violence, mental health issues, misogyny. Was it, number one, difficult to take yourself to those places where you would have to write about themes like that?
No.
Why not?
On Saturday we had a pre-launch event for book clubs only, and there are quite a few of them here, so thank you for coming again. And remember that the discussion got quite heated, and one of the ladies called me a pervert. And I think for some reason it's not hard at all for me to write about dark things. So my business partner, she's a lady, she lives in Cape Town, and when her husband read my second book, Dying in New York, he never met me, and he got quite alarmed, and he said to her, "Is this a man you're talking to? He seems to be quite violent." So no, for some reason it's not hard for me to write those things. I'm not sure where it comes from, but it always comes spontaneously. Maybe there's a dark side, and I think it's a dark side to all of us, right?
And sure, there's the dark side, but there's also a lot of magic in this book, or rather quite a bit of magic, not to say a lot of magic, and fate, and I think chance meetings and some serendipity. But there are angels in the book, and that is interesting, considering that angels usually have a very strong, very heavy religious context or connotation.
Right.
Can you just tell us a little bit about why you chose to have angels feature in Yellowbone?
Right. So I don't think it's a spoiler. So what happens when Andre, who is he's the violin virtuoso, when he plays a beautiful piece of music, he sees angels. And I didn't want the angels he sees to be your typical fluffy church angels, like nice and blowing golden trumpets. So these angels he sees are big and they're strong and they're more like warriors. They never say a word, but they are very present in the book. And a lot of what Andre does is driven by the ecstasy he feels when he sees the angels. The angels were actually they were the part of the book that I was the most anxious about, and I thought it might be too far-fetched. But in having shown the manuscript to other people before it was published, they were actually very comfortable with the thought that there would be angels who would suddenly appear and they would be there. And I think perhaps there's a part of us that is not too afraid, or rather not. There's a part of us that I think does not find the thought of angels as being totally weird. So regardless of whether you believe in them or not, I think that there's a little kernel of doubt or reassurance that we gravitate to the thought of an angel can suddenly show up.
Okay. And
Is that a football manager's answer?
sort of. Lots of quotables, though, at least.
Because
so
we
that's
spoke
great.
about this before, and I said to her that a football manager, they never answer the question.
And then going back to teacher, Karaba's father, which is very interesting to me that throughout the book he's referred to as teacher, and she calls him teacher, he never calls him dad or anything. But he's Ghanaian, and to borrow your words, Ghana looms large in her.
Yeah.
But this is the first time you've written about Ghana in any way, shape, or
Yes.
form. Why,
Yes.
number one, did it take you so long? And number two, how did you feel doing it, writing about Ghana?
Yeah, the reason for that is because I've never felt confident enough to write about Ghana. And I've always had this image of my mother looking over my shoulder and saying, no, it's not like that. So it's actually taken me 4 books to be confident enough to write about Ghana. So So how did I feel? It actually, the things I write about Ghana, I'm pretty sure that the Ghanaians who read the book will not like it. But it was actually quite liberating for me to at last write about the place that I grew up. So I put a lot of my growing up experience and what I know about the country, those feelings and scenes and attitudes come through quite strongly in the book.
Yeah. Okay. And then another thing that comes through quite strongly is the music. And I mean, even the cover of the book has a beautiful violin on it. And when we'd spoken previously, you said to me, and I'm not saying you're a liar, but I don't believe you, that you were not that familiar with the violin until you started writing this book. But the way that you've written about the violin and the music, to me it sounds like somebody who is so well versed and is something that's been deep within you for a very long time. But you say it hasn't. Can you tell us a bit about, number one, why you have the violin in the book? And why it features so heavily, and the music as well?
Okay. So for that you have to blame Serge and Alberta. Because I have, so the first time I held a violin was actually last week at your house. It's actually the first time I've actually held a violin. So I had no affinity for violins at all. But sometimes when I write, something strange happens where a character or a theme will push itself into my consciousness and refuse to go until I write it into the novel. So that's how it was with violins. I just had this urge to write about violins. So I sought out, and I was lucky enough to find Serge and Albertus. So as you know, Serge is a violinist and Albertus makes violins. And actually the violin that Serge is playing was made by Albertus. So they shared a lot of the stories and the history and the mystery of the violins with me. And if you feel that I knew a lot about violins, it was entirely due to these two gentlemen.
Okay. Speaking of Serge, final piece of music for us, Ave Maria, and then afterwards we'll take it to the audience.
Well, I feel somewhat honored that Eka had the urge to find Serge.
I don't know if anyone would like to ask Echo anything or say anything to him.
Yes.
Echo, I find it refreshing that you are taking a stance against toxic masculinity in this book, even if you are delving into the depths of it and exposing it. The sense that I'm getting, do you see yourself as a writer, as an activist of sorts?
Not really. So I try to live out what I believe. So in my little circle of work and family, I will hopefully stand up for the things I believe in. Not necessarily stand up on a soapbox and make a strong statement in the traditional way, but maybe through my writing I do that subconsciously, but it's something which is actually, it's actually very dear to me.
Anybody else? Yes.
Lisa.
Thank you. Congratulations on your book, by the way.
Thank you.
Something about the music, classical music. I think anybody that actually appreciates classical music would understand the kind of emotion it brings about in an individual. We've had the opportunity to listen to 3 pieces of music, and what made me wonder about them, they're so different in how they convey emotion. And I wanted to understand whether that's something that probably permeates in your book. You know, the first piece was by Tchaikovsky, and the emotion that it brought about was anxiety, a little bit of haunting, and then you have Vivaldi's Spring, which is kind of uplifting and makes you want to feel happy. And then you have the last piece, Ave Maria, which is kind of reassuring. Is that something about your book that you think is expressed by this music?
Yes, the pieces that Serge played are pieces that feature in the book. So the book it's set in music, but not in the traditional way. And so the words can evoke so much emotion. And I think that the music, like you rightly pointed out, can then take it to not another level, but a different level. So I'm hoping that the combination of the words, the story, and the music can really serve to deliver a poignant and memorable story. Yeah.
Is there anyone else who'd like to say anything? I mean, I know that Echo's like very approachable and you can have conversations with him whenever, but it'd be so lovely if somebody could ask a question.
Firstly, just congratulations.
Thank you, Wendy.
Really, just admire your output and your continual work. And I guess my question is about that. So it's your 4th book. I wasn't putting my hand up because I was trying to formulate the question, but it's something like, what do you feel about the 4th book? I mean, what do you, do you read back White Valhalla, for instance? Can you? I'm just saying that as a writer because I struggle to read earlier works of mine. And just could you talk a bit about how you see yourself forming your writing? I mean, you spoke about somebody saying you're perfect. I couldn't read, but I noticed that you have an obsession, and we all do, and which is appropriate, I think, for an artist, and you have an obsession. Could you just talk about your work, like just your sense of what your work is and where it's going, where it's come from?
Okay, and I'm sure that some of you would have heard this before, but where the writing really comes from my mother. She's a teacher, and she always encouraged us to read a lot. So I guess from reading a lot, it's not a big step to wanting to write your own. So that's really where it comes from. So when I go back to read some of my previous work, and I don't read it, but I may flick through a page or two, I think that my writing is better. I think it's more controlled, it's more mature. So in that sense, I think that the output is better. And I'm also realizing the role a writer has, so whether you choose it or not. So the very fact that there are about 70 people here suggests that you are interested in what I've written, and maybe you have an interest in the things I may have to say. So I'm becoming more aware of that, and I hope that that awareness doesn't sort of mar the joy that I have in writing, because I never really want to be the writer who makes overt statements, and I'd rather you think about it and be moved. You'll be forced to stop and think. And so that's the sort of writer that I want to be, and I think I'm becoming. Mabo.
Well, I thought it was interesting when you say when you chose the title of the book, it wasn't really about what the social commentary, because I think that the term Yellowbone, for me as a South African, it's quite recent. I mean, we grew up knowing that light-skinned girls are supposedly more beautiful or prettier or whatever. But as an adult, then the term Yellowbone came, and it came part of urban language or youth. So when you said you didn't choose it, it was I found it interesting. I thought you actually deliberately chose it to actually bring about this whole notion. The whole notion of skin coloring or colorism. Well, not colorism, the whole thing, the light skin lightening, and it's part of something that we've grown up. Something that we've grown up with, that we know about, and we also do know. So I thought that's what I thought why you chose it. In fact, it was interesting. My little girl who's 5, I was reading. She says, "What's the book? What's written?" I said, "Yellowbone," and she said, "What does that mean?" And my response was actually quite emotional. I was like, "It's a stupid term," because I would like her not to be consumed into the shallowness of it. But but it's interesting that for you it wasn't that. But I thought, I thought it's strange when you said that. I thought you chose because of that.
I think it works on a few levels. I was reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, and he writes about his aunt in New York, and his aunt is light-skinned, and she was traveling on the train to see her daughter, and her daughter is darker skinned than she is. And on the train, she met a light-skinned man, and they began to flirt and talk. And when they got to the destination, she was so afraid that this man she started something with would associate her with a dark-skinned person, that she walked past her own daughter. And that haunted her for the rest of her life. So as much as it might be superficial, I think it also speaks to this sort of schizophrenia that blacks have. So on one hand, the narrative would be a black and proud, and on the other hand, we are black and we are ashamed. Yes.
Thank you for a wonderful book. I finished reading it on Sunday. Just on a lighter note, there are 2 dog characters in the book, Simba and Saddam. Okay.
Yes.
It's my first time actually that I see such a lot of airtime given to a dog character, especially to Saddam and his or her arthritis.
Yes.
Where does it come from? Are you a lover of dogs?
Yeah, so where the name Saddam comes from, and I'll tell you. So when we got our dogs, so we got 2 dogs, and we had a vote as to what the dogs should be called, and I wanted the dogs to be called Saddam. But I was overruled, or rather, I was outvoted. So the way I got my own back was to put Saddam in the book. So that's where that comes from. It was just a way to get mine.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So when Andre
The violin.
plays the violin, he sees angels.
When he plays a beautiful piece of music on a rare violin.
Oh, okay. And do you see or feel that there's some connection between that and that moment when you solve that equation, or when the writing writes itself, that you're in the presence of angels or whatever?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, because in that moment you feel all powerful, and you feel that suddenly life is simple and it's clear, and there are no contradictions. And that's what Andre experiences, and he tries, to his detriment, he tries to recreate.
And we have time for one more question.
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
for holding the mic, but just based on what the ladies have asked you, something that was very interesting was said in your recent interview. You talk about the moments that helps you keep writing and writing and writing. You mentioned that it's like voices are speaking to you. And that's when actually the writing becomes a lot more beautiful and easier. And I ask you the question, and perhaps maybe the question goes to your wife as well. Do you think you're schizophrenic?
When you treat you're right, so sometimes it feels like I'm taking dictation, and I may, and in those moments when I interpose myself in the writing, it's almost as though I feel a tap on my head, on my shoulder, saying, "No, stop! It's not like that." Right. So it's a strange thing, but I do feel it, that it's a story of taking dictation, and someone is telling you that this is what to write, and this is what happened, and this did not happen, so don't write it.
I just want to say, having heard what you've said, and just on a kind of parallel, I think the way you describe your writing, how it's kind of in your head, it's really your talent, because Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the greatest musicians of all time, they say that he actually didn't compose, that all the music was already in his head, where other composers kind of ponder and think, what am I going to write about? Would they write a melody, and then on the top of the melody they try to harmonize, and but they say Bach actually, and why they say this is that he wrote everything by hand, and when they look at his manuscripts, there are no errors, there were no rewrites, which means he just picked up that feather, plunked it in some ink, and just started writing. So this feeling of, where you say this kind of drive, or this voice, or this comes, is your natural gift, it's your natural talent. I just want to add one last thing. When the writing is not going well, are you amongst hell's angels?
There are lots of times when it's tough, and it's
I know all of that.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely beautiful book. I enjoyed it.
And
I can take one more question.
do we have one more question? Okay, the last question. Okay, 2 more questions. And then we're done. How many? 3? No, 2. Please. Hi, yes.
I'd like to know, in between finishing one book and starting your next one, what's the process? You spoke about the discipline, you sit and write every day. When you finish one book, between then and starting the next, what happens?
Oh, I try and make money.
Do you sit and write anyway and hope for something to keep?
No, it's so I wait for that urge, and I don't know when it will hit or what form the urge will take. But when something tells me that it's time to write, then I would write again. And I can feel it sort of stirring now, but it's not quite.
Final question.
Well, mine is not
Manila.
so much a question, but more of a comment. Now I'm listening to some of the comments that have been passed in the room, especially the last one that came from the gentleman behind me, to say that maybe Echo is schizophrenic. Because I think even how he writes, he gets into his characters. And the reason why I'm saying this is that I look at all his books. They talk about an oil field engineer, a banker. One of the things that perhaps people in the room don't know is that Echo is a strategist. He was a management consultant, and that's why I met him in 2001. And one of the things that are still stuck with me up till this day, my voice here, is that the room where we're seated executing the project, Echo used to sit facing the wall. And when he got into that spirit, you'd actually tell that Echo was talking to himself. He would be raising his hands and stuff like that. And I must say that up till this day, and I know he knows that I used to ask him for that presentation. I think that presentation that Echo made as part of the report was actually the best that I had seen to date. In fact, for the longest of my life, 22 years in consulting, it was actually my template for writing a report.
I should have charged you.
You can charge him now.
So yeah, I'm not surprised about the quality of the books that he reads.
Fantastic insight.
Thank you very much.
Echo, would you like to say? Oh?
Sorry,
Yes.
one more question.
Right. I can't see you.
I came late, so.
There you go.
I hadn't making money between books, so I'd like to know if he's ever thought of translating his books into visuals, like a movie or a series or something of that nature, because I understand most movies come from books.
Oh yeah.
Oh, by the way, it's Sunday.
Sandy. And especially for this book, I would really love to see the book on the big screen, because I really love to see the angels and hear the music and hear the music in a large theater. So yes, I would really love for the book to be a movie.
Please tell them about the cast you were asking me about. Who should play who?
Yeah, okay, so as a writer, you often dream that you dream about the movie and you see yourself walking down the red carpet. So I was playing this game and we were discussing with my wife, so I said, Forrest Whitaker should play Father Majola. And then we thought that teacher would be the actor whose name I don't know.
But where's he from?
Sorry?
Where's he from?
So the guy so the one in that series, you may have seen it, and it's called Love Is. So the guy who plays the younger main character, I thought he could be teacher, right? And then who else? There was a woman from Empire who I thought would be good as Precious. You know, so it was just fantasy.
Why is the fantasy not African?
Why is the fantasy
cast not singing African?
not singing African?
Yeah, like current African actors.
Oh, right. And I think it goes back to the fact that so there's a bit of vanity as well. So you want like the big Hollywood blockbuster. So for a Whittaker, let's talk.
Okay. Eka, would you like to say anything before we leave?
So I'd just like to say a big thank you to you. So thank you very much for your time and for facilitating the discussion. I really enjoyed it. And a big thank you to Serge and to Serge and Albertus. And I think that the book wouldn't have been the book, and the violins wouldn't have come as much to life without your help. So thank you very much to the two of you. And a big thank you as well to the book clubs for doing so much to promote the book and for sharing your joy in reading the book. And I'm looking forward to the next time we do a book club launch at my house. I think it will be even more rowdy than the one we had. And I'd also like to thank I'd like to say thank you to Nozizwe for her support, and also thank you to Yewande for your support as well, for your support and your friendship. And a big thank you to all my friends who are here, who have stuck with me while I sit facing the wall and talk to you. The fact that we're still friends, I think it says more about you than it does. So thank you very much. But thank you very much, everybody.
To thank one person as well.
I think I forgot to thank two people.
Okay.
So I'd like to thank Helene.
Thank you.
For all her help and her support in making this event possible. And of course I'd like to thank my wife. Would you stand up so they can see you? Stand up.
Oh, Eka. See how bossy he is?
So big thank you to my wife, Bridget, and I think for giving me the space to write and the encouragement to keep writing. So thank you.
Thank you to everyone. I'm sure there's refreshments, and Eka will be available to chat and sign books and all of that. Thank you so much for coming.